You're entering Corsi Nation.
This
Back
is the best of
Mike
Dr. Jerome
McCormick.
Corsi on Corsi
And,
Nation.
Mike, good to see you again. Looking forward to the interview.
Great to see you, Jerry.
We have Mike's books. He started with the book on the case to impeach Joe Biden. And this book is published by Bombardier. It's done very well. We've had a couple of interviews on this. Bombardier is, of course, Post Hill Press, and I'm an acquiring editor for Post Hill Press. And Mike has had these in the works before I became an acquiring editor. That's kind of full disclosure. And Mike has worked as a professional stenographer in the White House. And Mike, what years did you work and for how many presidents?
Well, I started there in 2002 and I went all the way through 2018. So I worked with President Bush and Vice President Cheney, President Obama and Vice President Biden, and then President Trump and Vice President Pence for 1 year.
Okay, and so that gave you kind of a center seat at a lot of things that went on because you were there to do official records of what was said during various meetings that required a public accounting. Is that correct?
Yes, it wasn't meetings, it was with specifically the press office. So anytime, and I worked specifically with Joe Biden from 2011 through 2017, and he was a handful back then, and that was when he had his mental acuity up to 100%. And then he just faded out of view. And by 2020, it was obvious to me he couldn't have been president, but they faked the election and got him in there. And so I started writing these books about how Joe Biden really shouldn't be president. And then some Marco Polo group gave me the Hunter Biden laptop in 2021, and I was able to dig in there and find emails, cross-reference emails of discussions between Hunter and his dad with times that I knew I was traveling with him to Ukraine or China and even the Vatican. I traveled with Joe Biden to the Vatican. And that's where all this criminal activity came from. So that's where I wrote the book and called him a criminal. There's a case to impeach. There was a case to impeach him. Now there's a case to put him in jail because this all predates his presidency. So he can't pretend he's got presidential immunity for stuff he did when he was vice president.
Well, again, we're going to focus today on the things that have to do with the Vatican.
Yeah.
And you're coming out with a new book. What's the title of your new book?
The new book is An Almost Insurmountable Evil, how the Obama deep state defiled the Catholic Church and executed the Wuhan pandemic.
That's going to be in print right after the inauguration. Is that right?
Yeah, February 5th is the time it goes to print on demand. So you can order it off Amazon.
This
or
is
Barnes
the
and Noble
best of
February
Dr.
5th.
Jerome Corsi on Corsi Nation.
It'll be, again, by Bombardier Books, which is an imprint of Post Hill Press.
Correct.
Okay, and so that's forthcoming. And your Substack, what is your Substack? So I'm going to refer to a couple of Substack posts you've done, which I think are particularly good and relevant.
Right. The Substack is Midnight in a Laptop of Good and Evil. Basically, it's me diving into the Hunter Biden laptop and digging out Joe Biden's evil. And I stumbled across this collaboration between the Obama-Biden White House and Theodore McCarrick about a year ago, and realized that this was the beginning of them using and I think McCarrick was a CIA asset or deep state asset, intelligence community asset. They used him to install Pope Francis to make the church a political arm of the Democratic Party for Obama.
Democratic Communist Party.
Yeah, that's right.
Democratic Communist Treasonous
Globalist.
Party.
Yeah,
Globalist Party.
Right.
Designed to really destroy the United States of America and replace it with a new world order, World Economic Forum, oligarchy.
Exactly.
And so I want to focus on a couple of your posts. And Chris, the first one I want to do is this deep state Hollywood evil behind the anti-Catholic conclave, which is one that was on December 17th, 2024, Substack. That's it right there. Now, we're going to cover a couple of the bottom line conclusion we're going to come to is that the CIA was deeply involved in a coup d'etat in the Catholic Church, just as it was trying a coup d'etat against Donald Trump with the CIA and the Russian collusion hoax. And that's going to come out. But there was also a deep state plot in which the CIA conspired with Obama to have Pope Benedict resign, and Pope Francis Jorge Bergoglio from Argentina, made Pope. And the primary idea was that Bergoglio was a Marxist, leftist, and globalist, and he wanted to establish the LGBTQ as the cornerstone policy of the Catholic Church, which was a completion of the Vatican II, which goes back to 1962, when the church started becoming more progressive and open to the radical left ideas. Is that a good summary, Mike?
Yeah, that's right. Yep. They McCarrick had been put into the Washington diplomatic whirl in the 90s when he was an archbishop in New Jersey, and pushed up through the ranks by George W. Bush's dad and the CIA to become this sort of global ambassador for the Vatican to China, to Iran. He went to all these hot spots. And he, at the time, was a pedophile. He had been raping seminarians in his summer home in New Jersey. And so they knew, the Vatican knew this, and the CIA, in my opinion, knew it. And they used that as sort of, he was their kind of leveraged operative, and they pushed him into the Vatican, and they gave him, I think, a lot of money. His strength was that he was a fundraiser. That was his special sauce. Well, who did he do that? Who gave him his money? They never really identified them by name. It was always wealthy Catholics. Well, maybe the wealthy Catholics were the CIA buying influence into the Vatican, and that's how they got Bergoglio into the papacy in 2013. And it was directly through his meetings. McCarrick would go into the White House and meet with the White House Chief of Staff, Dennis McDonough, also a Catholic. He had two brothers who took holy orders. One resigned. One was found, was demoted from a senior job to a junior job because he was covering for pedophile priests in Minneapolis, St. Paul. So this darkness that was in the Vatican was also carried into the Obama White House regularly by McCarrick and connected to Obama, Biden, and Dennis McDonough, and run into the Vatican with McCarrick.
Okay, so now we've covered this before in a few previous podcasts that we've done, but first of all, McCarrick was not only having sex with adult male seminarians, he was also having sex with underage altar boys, correct?
Yes, he was. That's eventually what got him kicked out of the priesthood. He was delaicized. When somebody in the 1970s, there was an altar boy who said he raped me, and they did an investigation. That's finally in 2017, that information came out. So this is important that it was in 2017, because this is after Trump has come in, and the CIA has to cover its tracks and has to get rid of this guy who's been their operative for years, decades rather. And so they got this old case pulled up, and the Vatican took a hold of it and used it to get him out of there. And that's what they did. And then they started covering for Bergoglio because Bergoglio was he was a very close friend. They were very close. And McCarrick was his right-hand man in a lot of policy decisions, especially with China, betraying the Chinese Catholics, going into South America and setting up drug trafficking, human trafficking connections with the cartels. This is very dark, evil stuff that the Vatican was allowing to take place under the Catholic Church to promote the globalist agenda, to promote the Vatican agenda. And it wound up, in my book that I write about, it wound up actually producing they connected into the rollout of the Wuhan virus, the Wuhan pandemic. The Vatican was part of that. So that all came out of Joe Biden's affiliation, Obama's affiliation with McCarrick and then with Bergoglio.
And Biden is supposedly a Catholic too, as is Nancy Pelosi, right?
Yeah. Nancy Pelosi and Senator Leahy was a Catholic. Dennis McDonough was a Catholic. John Brennan, who was head of the CIA, was a Catholic. In 2017, Mike Pompeo took over the CIA, but he named Bill Barr, who was a Catholic, to be on the CIA advisory group. That's when they got rid of McCarrick. So they were starting to move on protecting Bergoglio ever since Trump came in. Bergoglio had some anti-Trump comments when Trump was just a candidate running. He tried to influence that election with some comments, and one of the famous ones is, "I'm impressed with people who build bridges, not walls," because Trump was talking about building the walls, and so that became a big part of these Hollywood films and presentations.
We'll get to that in a minute. The key story here is that McCarrick, who was ultimately the Archbishop in Washington, D.C., was this fundraiser. It was CIA affiliated. I'm sure he was recruited by the CIA when they knew he was homosexual and a pedophile, and that this was a vulnerability that they could use to make sure he worked with the CIA. And the first plot was to get Pope Benedict to resign so they could make Bergoglio from Argentina Pope, and he brought in the LGBT agenda. Now, McCarrick ultimately, as Mike just pointed out, 2017 was the way they had the Catholic Church had an investigation. This older boy who said he'd been raped. They finally validated that case, and it was a good excuse to say that Cardinal McCarrick was now defrocked. He was laicized, which means he was no longer a cardinal. He was no longer a priest, but he was not excommunicated. Correct? He was still a Catholic.
Right. Yeah. He hasn't been excommunicated yet.
Well, probably never will be. He's been put away in a home somewhere and protected and isolated so the press can't get to him. And he's been yet protected in a cured way to keep him out of the public view. Still alive and still very much a force behind the scene, although with no official position. And again, now no longer able to act as an emissary in the Biden administration because, again, he was marginalized during the Trump years.
And one of the things they did is there were several lawsuits raised against him in Minnesota or Wisconsin. And as part of the process of sort of silencing him, he was found to be non-compos mentis. He wasn't able to stand trial. The judge said, no, he's too old and infirm. It was just kind of like what they did with Joe Biden in that Robert Hur report. They said, he's an elderly man who can't remember. So that's what they did with McCarrick, and they did that in 2020.
It was the same excuse that got Biden from being prosecuted or investigated as president for all the corruption in Ukraine and around the world, China, etc. Right. Bribery schemes, taking money for policy decisions, and the story coming out that Hunter Biden was a CIA agent, and this all was a CIA operation, which the CIA has evidently admitted as part of the protection of Hunter Biden. And that story has gone little reported. But the point is that the CIA is deep into this, and what Mike has uncovered is a whole web of very, very evil doings, so that just again, to cut to the end of the story, McCarrick goes to China and cuts a deal with China that allows the Chinese to suppress Catholics in favor of those who will go along with the LGBT or this new church, which is no longer theologically valid and get to traditional Catholicism, and suppress Catholics, suppress religious freedom in China under the name of Pope Francis reaching out to China and establishing positive relations through McCormick, correct?
Yeah, that's right. Yep.
It's pretty shocking. And then in Venezuela, what they did was they worked out a deal with the cartels through the office of the president of Venezuela, where the Catholic Church participated in drug trafficking, pedophilia, sex, child sex labor, the sex trade, and every other evil thing you can think of, with the complicity of the government involved. Is this all correct? I mean, this is, again, you document at length.
It was Honduras, the government of Honduras.
Mr. Honduras.
That's who Joe Biden set up, knowing that the president of Honduras was smuggling drugs into the United States, smuggling cocaine in the United States by the ton. They set up a business deal with him, and McCormick was part of it, of the negotiations. And that's what allowed, millions upon millions of illegal immigrants to come to the United States during the the Biden years. That was part of what they were doing. That was the globalist side of what they were trying to do, was build bridges, not walls. They were building bridges to change the voting structure of America by having this great reset program.
And also at the same time benefiting themselves and the CIA with the drug trade, the sex trade, the child sex labor trade. Child sex trade is, I think, one of the most horrific things on the face of the earth, taking innocent children and making them subject to adult pedophilia. And the children don't understand. They're abandoned. They are separated from their parents and thrown into this hell limbo stage where they're abused on a continuous basis, and they're psychologically and morally just destroyed as human beings.
Right.
All for the advantage of these demon satanic pedophiles that want to take advantage of sex with children.
Yeah, it's evil. It's absolute darkest evil.
Okay, now today we're going to concentrate on a couple of the Substacks that Mike has written. I want to start with this first one about the deep state Hollywood evil behind the anti-Catholic movie Conclave.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I'm not sure everyone watching this has seen Conclave, but it is I've watched the movie. It's ultimately a disgusting movie. What it is a story of the Pope dies, and you have an A-list cast that is in the movie Conclave, and some of the best actors in the world are including Ralph Fiennes, who's in it. Ralph Fiennes has had a distinguished career as an actor, and he plays a central character in the Conclave. The Pope dies, so in the Catholic Church, that's sede vacante. It means the seat of St. Peter, the Pope, is vacant. They have to have a conclave in which the cardinals of the Catholic Church are assembled into the Sistine Chapel in the Vatican, and they are locked up until they come out with a new Pope being elected by the cardinals, voting for the Pope. And it's a secretive process, but occasionally there's leaks as to what goes on. And in this movie, it's a very conspiratorial movie in which a lot of the forces competing for the papacy are exposed to want the papacy for money or power. And ultimately, there surfaces this mysterious cardinal from Kabul, and he happens to speak Spanish, and he comes on first as kind of a shadowy character, but then he gives a speech at the end of the conclave in which he's talking about how the Catholic Church needs to reach out to the downtrodden, and the Cardinal of Kabul is made the Pope. A surprise move after this speech. But he reveals himself to be not only LGBT, but he says that he actually has the internal sex organs of a woman. So he's, as it were, a hermaphrodite. It's a male with female parts. And the Catholic Church is accepting him as their new Pope in this inclusive idea that we have to reach out to these disadvantaged minorities. marginalized populations that are not served by the Catholic Church. Now, the movie, I think, is disgusting in that Catholic Church has now got a hermaphrodite as Pope, which violates every teaching in the Catholic Church that sex is about procreation, the creation of new life, and the raising of that life in a moral Christian education, specifically Catholic education if you're Catholic, that is designed to acknowledge God as the only creator of life, and that men and women are created to have sex in order to procreate. It's not just for fun and games. And homosexuality and other forms of deviance are regarded as deviant, not just to be understood and sympathized. But the movement in Catholicism under Pope Francis is this synodal movement. I have a book I'll pull from my bookcase here in a second. The synodal processes are bishops holding meetings with the followers of the church to identify these marginalized minorities and to establish contact with them. And it starts out with the idea that the priests ought to care about the poor, the sick, the downtrodden, those who are less fortunate in life. Jesus cured lepers. Jesus reached out to the poor. And so this is an extension of Jesus's ministry, but they extend it to the LGBT as if these were just poor children who have a perfect right to have the sex the way they want to have it. They can do anything they want to do, regardless how sacrilegious it might be. And these are just all accepted. These are not lost sheep. These are just people the Catholic Church needs to reach out and make a home for. Mike, is that your understanding of the synodal movement? I want to reach and get this book while you're answering.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, that's a Pope Francis. He really pushed the synodal movement, and you saw it in some of the acceptance that the Vatican has tolerated for, this is kind of the outrage that was generated by the demonstration of anti-Catholic imagery during the Olympic opening ceremonies parade in Paris, and they just tolerated that. It was the Last Supper sort of caricatured as an LGBT gathering, dinner, orgy, who knows what. And it really bothered people, and that was probably one of the focal points that was global. It was totally unnecessary to make that part of the Olympics, and they did. And the Vatican just sort of tolerated it and for a couple of days, and then they released a very tepid statement condemning it, not condemning it, just sort of criticizing it. So that there's been a lot of those instances along the way with LGBT, but also with the immigrant refugees, what the illegal immigrants, what Pope Francis refers to as refugees. They've made that a big change in their nomenclature, where they talk about refugees, like these people have to be here because they need the help of that's the globalists. We have to help everybody move into these wealthy Western countries and take them over for our purposes. And so that's what the synodal movement to me means, is this sort of changing of the societal structure, using a church to change society.
Well, there's a book which I recommend to everybody. It's called The Synodal Process. Okay, and it's written by Jose Antonio Ureta, Ureta, and Julio Laredo de Izcue, Izcue, Izcue. A forward by Raymond Leo Cardinal Burke. Cardinal Burke is very much opposed to Pope Francis. And in it says, for instance, talking about the inclusion principle, which is part of the synodal movement of reaching out to these marginalized minorities. And the trick is very simple: to set out a word that looks very attractive at first, but contains a hidden meaning. That's with regards to diversity, inclusion, and equality, DEI. So it ends up meaning something quite different, perhaps even the opposite. And so, according to the Synod promoters, the path towards greater inclusion, quote, begins with listening and requires a broader and deeper conversion of attitudes and structures. This, quote, conversion translates to one of its main goals, which is to accept LGBT. And so for decades, the so-called liberation theologists have begun to broaden the Marxist concept of the poor, that is the materially dispossessed, to include any category that feels oppressed, such as women, indigenous peoples, blacks, homosexuals, and so on. And so in the light of the synodal journey, the synthesis of the continental stage of Synod for Latin America and the Caribbean was influenced by this Church of the Poor to accept the LGBT marginalized people as legitimate. Okay, so in the spirit of Jesus, we must include the poor, the LGBT plus communities, couples in second union, priests who want to return to the church in their new situation, women who have abortions out of fear, prisoners, the sick. Okay, so it's about walking together in a synodal church that listens to all kinds of exiles so that they feel at home. The church is a refuge for the wounded and the broken. Okay, now that blurs the idea that sex outside of marriage is fundamentally sinful. It's fundamentally not in God's idea of procreation, especially not when you get into the advanced forms of pedophilia that these demons want to legitimate. Mike, you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I mean, so I'm not anti-gay. I'm not anti-transsexual if somebody's transsexual when they're an adult. I'm not any of those things. I'm a Catholic. I go to church. Try to get my kids into church as much as I can. I don't think that I don't understand the process by which they're politicizing the church to the extent they are. That's what I object to. I object to when Obama and Biden and Dennis McDonough, through the CIA's involvement of Cardinal McCarrick, politicize the church for their goals. And, you know, the LGBTQ, whether it's LGBTQ or the refugees or the illegal immigration free-for-all on the southern border, it was all tremendously damaging to our society, to our culture. And we're seeing that in the West, in European countries now. I mean, a lot of the immigration free-for-all is affecting the safety and security of European communities everywhere. So that's what we're trying to wrestle with. And the Pope Francis isn't the moral voice that we need right now. He's not doing that. And so we have to look at why was he put in there. And this is very insidious. The CIA put him in there for these purposes. And we have to pull back the veil, bring the sunlight in, and show people this is what you have there. I think they have to decide, is this what you want? Do you want the CIA running your religion? I don't.
Well, see, I go a little further than you do, Michael, in that I say, first of all, if somebody wants to take a gun and shoot themselves in the head, my best advice is get out of the way. Probably not going to stop a suicidal from committing suicide.
Right.
We might make certain efforts, but beyond that, a determined suicidal is going to commit suicide. Okay, and so you say, sorry to hear that, but goodbye. And one less to worry about. And unfortunately, what's understood is that, okay, so these two homosexual men, they just love each other. Why do we want to interfere with them? Which was the public relations propaganda campaign run in the 70s, 80s, and 90s to normalize homosexuality. Ignores all the brutal homosexual acts that are practiced, including the sacrilegious ones where they have homosexual sex with Jesus crucified on the cross. And the whole idea is that the understanding of the CIA and these demons is that once you normalize these behaviors, and demand that they be celebrated by the majority, you've opened the door to Satan. And these are ways in which the perversion that they are inevitably going to produce and the confusion they produce is determined to achieve the Marxist goal of destroying the family, destroying the society, and abandoning God, and embracing satanic rituals, which ultimately these various sexual practices gravitate towards. So if you can accept homosexuality, why can't you accept bestiality? Accept bestiality, why can't you accept pedophilia? These men just happen to like boys. Who's to object? The boys probably like sex too. Okay, well, it's all crap. It's all nonsense.
Yeah, that's what McCarrick was. That, he kind of had that perspective.
Yes.
In investigations they did in the Vatican. He said, well, it was consensual. They weren't children. But when they found out that he had done it with a young person who was a minor, that's when the Vatican finally acted. But they hid that for decades.
If you could do pedophilia, why can't you do necrophilia? Why can't you have sex with dead people? Might as well, since you're not procreating. You have sex with dead people. Why can't you have snuff sex orgies in which someone is killed in the process of sex to intensify the sexual excitement of those watching? In other words, where's the limit?
Right.
And it's understood that this is the way the psychology is and the way it operates. It's understood that once you've opened the door, you can't shut it. Okay, so traditionally, yes, we've had homosexuals, we've had transgenders, we've had every kind of perversion under the face of the sun, but they've been relatively small percentages, and they've been largely appropriately marginalized, so they don't become celebrated by the majority. Once they're brought into the Catholic Church and seated right next to the seat of St. Peter, if not on his lap, engaged in a sexual activity, then you've destroyed the fundamental moral character of the Catholic Church, which was the goal of these demons to begin with. So I'm saying this was a well-understood plot that was architected in order to destroy the church. And McCarrick knew what he was doing, and he was evil in the process. Now, we may disagree on that, or you may not want to come out and openly oppose gays and the others, and I understand the political hesitancy to do so. I'm objecting to the politicalization of deviant sexual behavior in order to destroy God and God's values. And that's where I draw a really hard line on this. Now,
this is the best of Dr.
in your
Jerome
first
Corsi
article,
on Corsi
when
Nation.
you picked up the Conclave as a movie, one of the things I thought you did extremely well was that this hermaphrodite, who is the cardinal from Cabal, who enters into this kind of surreptitiously, speaking Spanish, gives a speech to the conclave just before he's made pope.
Right.
And the speech is about inclusion. It's about reaching out to the poor and to the downtrodden. The church has to venture into the areas of where people are oppressed. And while the cardinal from Cabal never mentions that he's a hermaphrodite, that's not disclosed until the very final scenes of the movie.
And it's kept secret between him and, Ralph Fiennes, the character Ralph Fiennes plays, who's sort of the manager of the conclave. And, so there's no real big reveal of this guy's actual physical, makeup. He, in the movie, he professes that I was made perfect by God and therefore I'm okay to be Pope. And that's what I believed. And so that's the acceptance level they're trying to promote through this movie.
Right.
And,
trying to marginalize an almost a physical impossibility that, how many human beings are born male, genitalia, with internal female organs? I mean, it defies not only logic, but it defies medical practice. It may have occurred once. I mean, there are Siamese twins born. There are children with various deformities born. You get thalidomide, and you can produce all kinds of abominations in terms of the birth of these monsters. But it doesn't mean they're normal. It doesn't mean they need to be celebrated. In fact, what this movie is doing is it's elevating this hermaphrodite as if this were the epitome of the sexual, as it were, pyramid, where the hermaphrodite's at the top, the pinnacle. And it's based on a speech that McCarrick gave when McCarrick was describing in a speech that he gave, which was copywritten, but yet made public, in which he describes the conclave in which Bergoglio was made Pope, in which Bergoglio played the same stunt.
Right.
He gave a 4-minute speech, which was rehearsed, and it was breathtaking. They all stopped and listened to it. It's like, reminded me of Obama's speech in the 2004 Democratic National Convention when he got to do a headlining speech. And he said, "We are all Americans. We're not red Americans and blue Americans. We're not this, we're not that. We are all Americans." Okay, in which he was erasing the LGBT and all of the distinctions as if, the fundamental fact that we're all born in this country and Americans means that you've got to accept everybody and everything under the sun. That's
right.
The whole idea. God created it all, so what's wrong with it?
Yeah, and so that speech by McCarrick took place in 2013 in front of an audience of high-profile Catholics at Villanova University. It was the fall of 2013. So Bergoglio had been installed as the Pope, and so McCarrick sort of walked through his experience as being in Rome. He was a retired cardinal, so he couldn't vote, and he wasn't in the Sistine Chapel as a voting cardinal. He was there discussing and, as it turns out, influencing cardinals on how to vote. And he talked about this amazing event, that this speech that he called it 4 minutes that changed the conclave, that Bergoglio had this speech where he talked about the church on the periphery. Well, that's supposed to be secret. That's supposed to be top secret. There are vows of secrecy that take place that were what was said in the Sistine Chapel for this conclave. And it got leaked out. And who did it get leaked out to? The McCarrick somehow got it. And then it wound up in a newspaper. And McCarrick says in this speech he gives at Villanova, he goes, "I can only talk about this with you because it was in a newspaper, in an Italian newspaper, it was written about." Well, how did they find out about it? I think the CIA influencer McCarrick found out about it and leaked it to the newspaper. So he started the whole process of informing and influencing through the newspaper. He did another newspaper article previous to the, right as soon as, previous to the conclave, as soon as Benedict retired, there was a national Catholic news organization that interviewed him. And that one of their questions was, well, is Cardinal Bergoglio from Argentina potentially a pope? Will we see a pope from a non-European country? And that became the headline of the article. And McCarrick, of course, said, yes, we will. I think we will. We almost had it last time. So they're talking about things that are secret into the media, and that's how the CIA operates. And that's what he was doing.
Well, and again, this is part of the whole modus operandi, where the press is a willing accomplice of the CIA and is going to be willing to publish their stories, lying or not lying, in order to open the window for McCarrick to go public with this and set the stage for this kind of a stunt to be played when, Bergoglio is elected.
Right.
The next thing we're going to show is that this almost word for word, the same stunt is played in the movie Conclave, normalizing this hermaphrodite, again doing a very similar dramatic speech in Spanish, and Bergoglio spoke in Spanish when he spoke to the conclave.
Right.
And I want to play, Chris, if you'll cue up the McCarrick clip here, I'd like to play it because this again there's a confluence here between the CIA, the deep church, as Archbishop Vigano calls it, and it's in the other story, in the other article, Chris. It's in the first article on the deep state Hollywood evil behind the anti-Catholic, And that's it right there. So we're going to play that in a second. But you've got working together the deep church, McCarrick, a pedophile, homosexual cardinal who's going to be defrocked and lay it, but no longer made it, but not excommunicated, no longer made a priest or a cardinal, but not excommunicated, not thrown out of the church for sexual behavior. And cooperation between the deep church, the CIA, the intelligence agencies, the media, in terms of the newspapers and other print media, running in advance of the story, and then taking it back to Hollywood, where Hollywood's a willing accomplice, to make a movie about this and to normalize this whole abomination. And I use abomination with specific reference to my 2008 book, Abomination, which I chose as the title coming out of Daniel, Abomination of Desolation. And Abomination is not just the abomination, it's an abomination. So let's listen to this speech.
Of the non-voters, that's about everybody spoke. Of the voters, maybe half spoke because they could speak later in the halls, in the lunchroom, and walking around. Almost the last day, they called him Bergoglio.
He's talking about the conclave of the cardinals.
For 4 minutes, period.
This is Bergoglio.
Although he had obviously prepared, and without a watch. And he went on, and he spoke about something which we've heard from him now quite a bit. The church on the periphery. That's the word he used, periferio in Spanish, because he spoke in Spanish. And he said, that's where the church has to be now. Church has to be where people are hurting, people are discriminated against, where people are very poor, where people are very sick, where people don't have homes, where people don't have rights, where people are afraid, do not know how to love God anymore, where people don't have comfort in God's presence anymore. And he went on for 4 minutes.
Stop it there for a minute. Stop it there for a minute. Stop her there. Say, Chris, stop it there. So notice how he's talking about the marginalized. It's always the poor, the sick, the downtrodden. These are people for whom it would be normal to have sympathy. Okay, it's like talking about the sick. They're not necessarily there because of a fault of their own, you would say, or if they are at the fault of their own, they're fallen and they need help. And it's right to reach out to them as broken or fallen to try to get them to get back on the right path. He doesn't say a thing about LGBT. He doesn't say a thing about homosexual practices that are sacrilegious with regards to Jesus' crucifixion. He doesn't talk about snuff films. He doesn't talk about necrophilia. Doesn't talk about pedophilia. But all those by inclusion are the people who are misunderstood, who can't get close to God. And it's our fault because we don't reach out to them as the church. That's the language perversion in here. Mike, would you agree?
Yeah, that's pretty accurate. I mean, this is a CIA influencer. He knows what he's doing. He's been doing this for a long time, and he knows his role in this in front of this audience. And it's very unusual that he comes out and has this statement at this time. At that time that he was making this statement, he was already putting together with Pope Francis a pro-refugee program that was going to roll out the next year. So this is the winter. This is October of 2013. By a couple of months later, there are already unaccompanied minors, young children, showing up on the southern border of America from South American, Central American countries, Honduras, Guatemala, El Salvador, Mexico. And these kids come from nowhere, and no one's really sure how they got there. So this is, and McCarrick is talking about, at this time, he gives a speech in Villanova. He's put a op-ed in the Washington Post about, we've got to bring the illegal immigrants out of the shadows. So he's part of this process. It's a political movement behind the scenes in coordination with Obama. They want to bring in all these foreign illegal immigrants to make them Democratic voters. That's what they wanted. That was the whole purpose.
And let's get to the root of it. Obama's homosexual. He's at least bisexual. And that's I don't
That's
think
my
there's,
opinion. That's correct.
and certainly Larry Sinclair's opinion. And there's credible evidence, I believe, that Obama is at least bisexual. And preference, usually many men who are bisexual, their preference is sex with men. It's like lesbians, the preference ultimately ends up being sex with women. They may be bisexual, but it's not the preference. And you get a situation here where this is being normalized. Okay, and McCarrick, let's play a little bit more of McCarrick, and then I want to go back to the Conclave movie. So, Christopher, you'll pick up where you left off on McCarrick.
I've been trying to say, did I make this up after he was elected? I don't think so. For the first time in those other days, there was a silence after he spoke, about 30 seconds, and nobody, the Cardinal stood down, didn't say, "Thank you, Your Eminence, I now call on Cardinal so-and-so." It was just a pause there because he hit a nerve somehow. There was some contact there, and I think there was a Italian newspaper who found out about this. That's why I can talk about it, and wrote in the paper, 4 minutes that changed the conclave. Because before the conclave began, we had 4 minutes of Bergoglio in talking about things that others have talked about, but doing it in a special way. It made a difference. Was that part of it? Who knows? Was my friend who said, push Bergoglio, did he say it to a lot of people? I don't know. Because what I wanted to do now is to talk about something that's very special to me. And I don't know if you know about it. I want you to know about it. You know, when the Pope is elected, the cardinals who are electors go into the Sistine Chapel. Now, some of you have seen the Sistine, been in the Sistine Chapel, so you know what it looks like. It's a sort of long and relatively narrow room. Well, it's a chapel. Let's say the altar's up here, the door is there. There are 2 long wooden benches on this side, 2 long wooden benches on that side. The cardinals sit behind them. And you can get like 30 people at each bench. You have 120 voters. That takes care of it. 30, 100, 120. There were 115, 114 voters at this last election. So they were there. And what you do, in order always, you know, when I went to the last election, you know, in front of me was the Cardinal of Dublin. Behind me was the Cardinal was Pedro Rubiano, the Cardinal of Bogota. You're always together. And what you do, you fill out your little card. You have a card. It says, "Eligo in summum pontificem." I elect as Holy Father, as Supreme Pontiff, and you write a name in. You have it in your hand, and you walk up with it in your hand. When you get to the altar, now this is the Sistine Chapel. And those of you who have seen pictures or have been there, you know that behind the altar, this wonderful, powerful painting of Michelangelo's Last Judgment. And in front of that, you take this oath. You've taken oaths of secrecy before, but this is the last oath you take. And every time you vote, you take, you know, if you vote 5 times, this last election they had 5 times, every time you vote, before you put your piece of paper with the name on in the urn, you say in Latin, "Testo Dominus Jesus Christus, qui me judicaturus est." It's all the part I remember. It's in Latin. "I call on Jesus Christ, my Lord, to be my witness. He who will judge me." And there you're standing before this great, wonderful, powerful picture of the Last Judgment. "He who will judge me. The man I am voting for is the one who, under God, I believe should be Pope." Now, what does that do? If you really believe that and you say it, it means this is no longer an election. This is a discernment. You are trying to discern God's mind.
Okay, let's quit it there again.
What God
That's enough right there. So now they've gone and advanced this to where it's not just the election of Bergoglio, it's God's intention that Bergoglio be elected.
Right.
And so they're trying to say this is God's will that's being done, even though they are putting into place Bergoglio, who himself has a questionable record of having born a child to him of his own misbehavior with pedophilia, etc. There's a long record of Bergoglio in Argentina that's been suppressed. And again, they're saying that because they went through this process and this speech that was given, this was a magical moment in which God influenced the cardinals to pick Bergoglio because that was God's choice. Okay, it's a very clever psyop.
Yeah, and what I find really interesting about what he just said is he goes, "If you believe it." So to me, that tells me that he doesn't believe it.
He doesn't believe it.
He doesn't believe it. He's just saying, if you buy this stuff that we're doing, then this is what it means. But if he's a believer, he would never say, if you believe it.
No.
He would just say, this is what it means. This is what it means. We're discerning the mind of God. He wouldn't say, but he wouldn't qualify it with that, if you believe it. That's the evil that's in there. That's the evil that's in there.
That's a giveaway. That now his evoking of this argument is now a manipulation because he doesn't believe in it. He wants you to believe in it. Okay, let's finish this out, and then we're going to go to a clip from the movie. Okay, go ahead. We're not going to go to a clip. We're going to go to an interview with the director. So, Chris, you want to play the remainder of McCarrick's presentation at Villanova? Just a couple of minutes more.
The man whom I'm voting for is the one whom I believe God wants to be Pope, not the one whom I would like to be Pope, not my buddy, not the fellow who's going to give me a better diocese or will give me will give me a place in Rome, not the fellow who's going to give me a lot of auxiliaries, not it. The one that I believe under God that God wants to be Pope. That really it takes it out of the realm of elections, out of the realm of, my buddy, my friend. Puts in the realm of God. You try to read the mind of God. That's precisely what the fellows did. And I think they read the mind of God, and I think they came up with Cardinal Bergoglio.
Okay, stop right there. That's enough for that, because that's the crux of what he had to say. Okay, now we've made the argument. Now let's go. There's earlier on in this Substack, and again, Mike's Substack. Mike, what's the name of your Substack?
Midnight in the Laptop of Good and Evil.
And your published book is this one on the case to impeach and imprison Joe Biden.
Correct.
And your forthcoming book is titled?
An Almost Insurmountable Evil, How the Obama Deep State Defiled the Catholic Church and Executed the Wuhan Pandemic.
We're going to make sure that Kash Patel is aware of your book when he comes into the FBI, and Pam Bondi, and we have several people to recommend for the FBI that could help investigate this, yourself included. And we're not going to let this is not going to pass under the rug. It's not going to be forgotten about. There's deep crimes being committed here. And
I can be a witness in front of a grand jury and put Joe Biden, specifically nail him down as a criminal. And same with other people in that whole conspiracy they had. There's a lot to it.
Well, let's go to the clip from the movie. And Chris, it's the part where this need proof that the conclave, the movie, is a psyop weapon. Here's high art Hollywood promo clip of its director, Berger, rationalizing that his movie's ugly ending was an act of love. Okay, so that's a little bit earlier. It's not that clip right there. Keep going. That's the clip right there. Let's play. They just passed it. Let's play that clip.
I had a small pickup on Conclave. We had some money left over. I was asked, "Do you want to do anything?" I said, "Great."
What was it? Everyone's asking.
It was Carlos's the Pope's, the future Pope's speech in the end. I did it in Spanish. October 7th it happened. And I felt some of the feeling of the speech should change a little bit. It just felt like different. In the time, somehow felt different. It's never mentioned, of course not, but it's somehow the feeling that we had after those attacks. Peter and I felt, and Tessa felt, we need to somehow change the language of it a little bit.
How did they inspire that then?
It's some of the feeling of it was different, more. It sounds a bit simplistic, but thinking about love more than war. I had a
Okay, so if we go earlier, a little bit up above, there's a clip from the movie in which the movie says that this is war. Just play that clip.
I shall pretend this conversation never took place.
But it has taken place. This is a conclave. It's not a war.
It is a war. And you have to commit to a side.
Okay, the point of that clip is that the movie itself presents this as a coup d'etat in the church. There's a group in the church trying to take over. It is a political process. It is a war. It isn't a God selection. It's a power selection. And the speech that given in Spanish and presented in English in subtitles to an audience that doesn't speak Spanish hides the fact that it is the same inclusion speech that Bergoglio gave in terms of we have to deal with the downtrodden and with this cardinal from Kabul who is attractive. He's not admitting to being a hermaphrodite at this point. He looks like he's just a innocent, meek, but lovable cardinal who shows up accidentally and is allowed into the College of Cardinals conclave. And he's speaking in his native language and convincingly in Spanish. And so the Berger's genius is to depict this trans character in translation giving a Bergoglio speech. And it's kind of wink, wink that Bergoglio knew what he was doing. This knows what they were doing. And the whole thing was designed to get a LGBT, or in this case, an even more extreme hermaphrodite made pope. And this is supposed to be God's selection. Now, if you want to pervert the Catholic Church, I can't think of anything more perverted to do than what was done in this movie and what was done in reality with Bergoglio. Mike, your comments?
Yeah. I mean, you could kind of see it coming once they showed this unusual character
This
coming
is
in.
the best of Dr. Jerome Corsi on Corsi Nation.
When you get to the ending, it just was it was just Hollywood crap. And so, I mean, it hasn't been very well liked. I don't know if they get any Academy Award nominations out of it. Not like the two Popes movie of 2020, which did get several Academy Award nominations. And that was almost along the same lines, where they politicized the story about the election of Pope Francis specifically.
Well, we'll do another interview next week on that, and I want to cover the two popes on Netflix as a separate presentation.
Yeah, okay.
But I want to refer to a couple of things that Archbishop Vigano has written, and you're close to Archbishop Vigano, and I have been as well. In fact, I want to hold up, we published in English this book on the excommunication of Archbishop Vigano by Pope Francis, because Archbishop Vigano has spoken out forcefully against Bergoglio, against McCarrick, against the homosexuality and LGBT, against in the church, against Vatican II. And the book is J'accuse, and it is the subtitle is Shedding Light on My Excommunication. And I basically wrote a preface to this, and I said, with this title, His Excellency alludes to the short essay J'accuse le Concile that Monsignor Marcel Lefebvre, founder of the Society of St. Pius X, wrote in 1976. French Archbishop wrote, "It is essential to demystify this council, the Vatican Council II, that those responsible for Vatican II wanted to be pastoral, due to their instinctive horror for dogmas in order to facilitate the official introduction of liberal ideas into a church document. But once the operation was completed, they dogmatized the council, operating it to the Council of Nicaea, comparing it to the Council of Nicaea, claiming that it was equal to all the others, if not superior. And what the Vatican Council did is it introduced the spirit of the progressive woke left, in which Bergoglio basically has sided with the forces of darkness. And what Archbishop Vigano wrote is that globalism supports LGBTQ plus ideology. Bergoglio authorizes the blessing of same-sex couples and imposes on the faithful the acceptance of homosexuality, while covering up the scandal of his proteges like McCarrick and promoting them to the highest positions of responsibility. Whenever governments at the service of the World Economic Forum have introduced or extended abortion, promoted vice, legitimized homosexual unions and gender transition, encouraged euthanasia, and tolerated the persecution of Christians, not a word has been spent in defense of faith or morals that are threatened or in support of the civil battles so many Catholics who have been abandoned by the Vatican and the bishops. The Catholic Church has been slowly but surely taken over, and Bergoglio has been given the task of making it a philanthropic agency, the Church of humanity, of inclusion, of the environment, at the service of the New World Order. But this is not the Catholic Church. It is her counterfeit. And I think, Mike, you'd agree.
Yeah, that's right. What Bergoglio has done, what Pope Francis has done, is he's defiled the Catholic Church, and he did it to promote the globalists. He wouldn't be there in the Vatican if he didn't make a deal behind the scenes through McCarrick, with Obama, with Biden, through Dennis McDonough, and the globalists that backed him, the World Economic Forum people. There's a picture in the Substacks I have of McCarrick going to the World Economic Forum in 2008. So in the winter of 2008, he went to the World Economic Forum. That's when Obama was running for president as sort of this unknown long shot candidate. And then he comes through, and maybe that was McCarrick's duty there, was to tell the World Economic Forum, hey, keep your eyes on this Obama guy. He's going to do it. So, McCarrick, if you understand him as I do, as a sort of a influencer, CIA-backed influencer throughout his career, then everything he does, the dots connect from the George W. Bush White House through the Obama White House to the election, through the election of Barack Obama into the election of Pope Francis. And now what we have with this horrific situation in the Vatican. And, it was the reason I called the book An Almost Insurmountable Evil, is because we had a chance to vote ourselves out of it. And we did when we elected President Donald Trump in November. So that was the whole point. And, I wrote that book, The Almost Insurmountable Evil, over the summer and tried to get it published right before the election. There was so much going on. We couldn't get it out. Now it's coming out after Joe Biden is out of office, which I think is good, because there's things in the book that are crimes or will lead to investigations. He won't be able to pardon people that are named in this book. So we're kind of skating around his pardoning proclivity, and I'm glad for that.
Thank you, Mike. We'll do an interview next week on the Two Popes Netflix film, and then when your book is out after the inauguration, we'll cover it as well.
Oh, great!
And so I think we've done a series of programs with you here, and we're building a series of programs which I think expose the evil of the Obama administration, the hatred of the church, the hatred of God,
Right.
the willingness to glorify homosexuality, lesbianism, pedophilia, every kind of sexual abuse you can think of is all normal. We should celebrate them. And the evil purpose of subverting the Catholic Church into an LGBT community, and the whole idea, the whole purpose of what Archbishop Bergoglio is doing is he's saying that the real heretic is Pope Francis. And he's been excommunicated because he dared to do what have for centuries been the duty of especially the cardinals and the hierarchy of the Catholic Church, which is namely to proclaim the Catholic doctrine, the traditional Catholic theology and liturgy against the progressive heresy of Vatican II and Pope Francis, which is now in command of the Catholic Church, and dared to excommunicate one of the, I think, most profound and deep thinkers about the Catholic Church, its history, its theology, its purpose, and God's intentions for human behavior, which do not include satanic acts of sexual depravity glorified as if we were doing homage to the poor. Mike, any final words before we conclude?
Yeah, I mean, the point I make over and over in my book, The An Almost Insurmountable Evil, is who was McCarrick working for? And now, who was Pope Francis working for? Are they working for God? It's like the Catholic Church is no longer the Word of God. And I've written this in an email to Archbishop Vigano. When you tell the truth, you're telling God's word. So this is the truth about what happened. What I know happened in the Catholic Church and in the Obama-Biden White House. It's God's word, and God's on our side. He does not want his church destroyed by politics. He doesn't want that. And so we have to start by understanding where it is and how to unravel this evil that's in there.
Well, as Jesus said to St. Peter, the gates of hell shall not prevail against it, against the church. And the gates of hell will not prevail here either. They'll be turned back to hell. But in large part, Mike, your work exposing this from the inside, having seen what you saw as stenographer and now documenting the Obama and this tremendous perversion of faith, not only with Bergoglio, but we can demonstrate happened in Honduras with the Biden administration and Obama. And I think we're going to expose once and for all the CIA is involved in the deep church, just as it is in the deep state. That Obama is working for the CIA, probably was always a CIA agent in creation. Their aim is to destroy God and destroy. They're depopulationists, they're demons, that anyone who would create an agreement blessed by the Catholic Church with a president of Honduras that would lead to drug trafficking, the sex trade, pedophilia, and children sold into sex slavery, deserves to go to hell. Not only that, they deserve to be exposed and criminally prosecuted. And so therefore, we're going to bring this to the Department of Justice and the FBI as a case that needs to be investigated as crimes against humanity that lead to the highest levels of the U.S. government and the Catholic Church. And Mike, your work has been instrumental in bringing this forward, and we will continue to do enough podcasts to get this out to the American public to make sure all your important work gets the attention it deserves.
Thanks, Dr. Corsi.
Okay, as Dr. Jerome Corsi, I want to sum up by saying, in the end, God always wins. God will win here too. I implore everyone in the spirit of 2 Chronicles 7:14, let's get down on our knees and ask God's forgiveness for allowing this depravity to run rampant as it has in the past few decades. God will hear our prayer and will heal our land, and the criminals who have caused these abominations will be brought to justice, if not now, certainly in the Last Judgment. It was Michelangelo depicted, Sistine Chapel, in front of which Archbishop McCarrick describes an apostasy being conducted for the CIA in the election of an illegitimate pope. Celebrated now in a movie of an even more bizarre, sexually compromised pope that we're supposed to celebrate as the Vicar of Christ. It's not going to happen on our watch.
This is the best of Dr. Jerome Corsi on Corsi Nation.